Welcome to Prepare to Care. We are an AARP podcast bringing you free information, free resources, and free tools to help caregivers and their families. I'm your host today. I'm Eddie Orm. Thank you for joining us. March is Women's History Month. In honor of this observation, we're devoting this podcast to women in finances, in particular, life after divorce, retirement funds, and available resources. Here to talk to us about women and their finances is Texas attorney Jolene Trevino. Ms. Trevino is working with the Trevino Law Firm in Houston, and she's also a part of the Latin Women's Initiative. Ms. Trevino, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's get right into it, and let's talk about how important is it for a woman to know about their family's finances?
Well, Mr. Ora, one of the most important things for a woman or any family member in general is for you to know your net worth. It's an important tool for your family and your family's success to always know what your assets are and what your liabilities are. With respect to divorce, having this information is very important, whether you're in a happy marriage or not. It is a good habit for you and your spouse to at least sit down once a year, periodically, to update your financial inventory. Doing this inventory is also important in the event of a sudden death of a spouse. This inventory will outline where your assets are being held and their approximate values. An inventory can be as detailed as on an Excel spreadsheet, or you can simplify it and just write it down on a notepad. But you should always have that list of all the assets, including your separate and community assets, as well as any debts and liabilities you owe. Some of the examples of these assets could include the following: all your real estate property that you may own. This would include the legal descriptions, deeds, the fair market values, and the mortgage balance statements. You could include in that inventory your vehicle information, such as the titles and any notes you may own and the companies that you owe that money to. The bigger accounts are the checking, savings, or any cash accounts. You want to include in your inventory the name of the banks, account numbers, and approximate balances, and the date of those balances. Retirement accounts are extremely important to include in your inventory. IRAs, 403bs, 401ks, any annuities, whether it be in your name or in the name of your spouse, should be included in that inventory. I would include the company name, the employer, the account information, and any approximate balances. Stocks, bonds, investments accounts are also included in that inventory with the same thing: account numbers, approximate balances. Do not forget to include life insurance policies, any 529s that belong to your or that are in the name of your children, business assets, whether those businesses are partnerships or corporations, any personal property such as jewelry that may be valuable to you. The other thing we can't forget on an inventory is the debts and liabilities that you owe. Credit card balances, loans you may have taken, tax liabilities that you owe to the IRS. All of those things will be included in your inventory. Once you figure out what your net worth is, you can at least know where you stand financially. This is important for a woman or a man, happy marriage or not a happy marriage. You should always know what you're worth at any given day and where to locate those assets. Now, if a divorce is imminent, I would highly suggest that you save all that information, if you can, on some type of hard drive or even on the cloud. Information such as your bank statements, your last 2 years bank statements, or your spouse's W-2s, tax returns. This will help you determine how much income is coming in to the household in the event sudden death occurs or an imminent divorce. You also should write a list of what your monthly household expenses are in the event of divorce. You need to be able to know how much cash comes in and how much you spend.
Thank you, Attorney Trevino. This is also extremely helpful to us because so many of us as caregivers need this information anyway.
Right.
So if you begin collecting this because it's a death or because it's a divorce, it
Right.
helps your children later to know exactly where to begin caregiving. You
Correct.
mentioned the divorce,
Right.
and as we know, the death of a spouse or illness can throw a financial wrench, certainly into the lives of women. Um, let's begin again with divorce. What should a woman do first to ensure she's financially stable after a divorce? And you've given us really good information to prepare for. How do we maintain the fact that we want to be stable after a
Okay.
divorce
So
or death?
I think I think well, if and I think it's important primarily to it before divorce, right? I mean, I think couples know if there's issues brewing, you know, right? But if it is imminent, it's important, in my opinion, for women or caregivers to always have access to some type of emergency cash. You can determine that amount of cash that you think you would need to function if you you had to leave the house suddenly, or your spouse passed away and you just don't have access to certain accounts. So it's always important for you to have emergency cash or and access to an emergency credit card in case of emergency. I mean, and I talk about divorce because I do a lot of family law, but in the event that you have to leave the marital residence suddenly, correct? If something happens and you have to go to a friend's house or to a shelter, at least you know you have a credit card and emergency cash to get you into a temporary living arrangement until you file for divorce. In the event of sudden death, you need that emergency cash until you can maybe possibly hire a probate lawyer to get your assets that you're entitled to. But one of the key points that, you know, if a divorce is imminent, you know, it always is important that if you are going to withdraw uh, cash from a joint account, that you keep good accounting of what you're withdrawing from joint accounts, as it will be scrutinized by a divorce lawyer. The second thing that I suggest is always consulting with a family law lawyer. um, if divorce is imminent, I always suggest that you pay for a consultation. You get what you pay for. So if you have any questions regarding the process, lawyers are going to ask you for your inventory that I mentioned previously. So they will want that information. Another thing is that, you know, if you need to meet with a probate lawyer, right? They will review with you what your rights are to certain assets if your spouse were to pass away suddenly. But after divorce, I think it is important that once you are awarded your assets, right, that a woman or anyone else consult with a financial advisor, right? Always consult with a financial advisor to determine how your money can make money for you. Sometimes some caregivers do not know or have never managed money before because, yeah, their spouse did it for them, so they don't know where to invest their money. They don't know where they should be spending their money. They don't even know how to budget sometimes. So it is important that you consult with a financial planner to help guide you with what you should be doing with the assets that you are awarded in a divorce.
Excellent advice. And I'm particularly interested in how you remind us that we should always have an emergency
Yes.
bag or some way to quickly get out if we need, whether that's cash,
Right, right.
clothing, even identifying a place to go to
Right.
early because we never know when something like this might happen.
That is
It's
correct.
best to be prepared.
Right.
Um, let me ask you about property laws and
Yes,
division of
sir.
property. Um, tell us about separate property or community property,
Okay.
and how do we organize ourselves for those laws?
Okay. And and again, this is coming from a divorce perspective, but in Texas, Texas is a community property state. What that means is that any property that you acquire during a marriage is jointly owned by both husband and wife. So in Texas, your property is going to consist of separate property or community property or mixed, and I'm not going to get too complicated into that, but separate property is generally property that you accrue or acquire prior to marriage, right? Property that you have inherited, property that you receive as a gift, and that can be during the marriage. The inheritance can also be during the marriage, or some personal injury settlement proceeds. It depends on what type of personal injury case. So there is certain separate property that is already carved out in the law that says if you acquired the property in these certain ways that I just mentioned, this will be considered your separate property, right? Which will not be divided during a divorce. Now, separate debt also can fall into that category. Any debt that you accrued prior to the marriage will be considered separate debt. Now, community property, as I mentioned, is any property that you acquire during a marriage. This could be real estate, retirement plans, joint and savings accounts, all the things that I mentioned earlier, business assets. This property is subject to division by both spouses. So it really doesn't matter if the retirement, if one spouse worked for 30 years and deposited funds into a retirement account, if one spouse was at home as a caregiver and raising children, that spouse will still be entitled to a portion of that. And it's usually half, in general, half of the retirement account. Now, in terms of division of property, if you cannot reach an agreement with your spouse, and that occurs more often than not, then we wouldn't have attorneys like me. The court will look at your inventory. That's why the inventory is so important, right? They will take a look at your inventory and look at all your assets and all your debts, and they will determine how it's divided based on a just and right division of property. That means fair and equitable. What is fair and equitable to both parties? Now, that does not necessarily mean it'll be a straight 50-50 split. It could be a 55 percentage versus 45, 60, 40. It just depends on what the factors are for that particular case that will determine what the judge finds as just and right division. Now, in terms of property division, there are certain things that can happen temporarily while a divorce is pending. Like one person can be asked to be excluded from the residence, but that's only temporary. It doesn't mean you're giving up your right. And I'm sorry, you can ask me your next question.
Well, you mentioned community property.
Correct.
Does it matter if everything is in the spouse's name?
No, that is a common misconception. I believe that some clients come in asking me, does it matter if it's in my husband's name and we bought it, and he was a person that it was titled to, right? No, the answer is no. As mentioned previously, as long as you can prove that it was acquired during the marriage, the name of whose name the title is under is not going to affect the characterization of the property. So if it is under your husband's name, always just bring the deed information. We'll work it out in court and we'll try to figure out what the characterization is, but we always assume that it is community property. So a spouse should not be concerned about whose name it's under.
Excellent. That's very helpful information. Now, we've talked about the importance of hiring an attorney and even having a financial advisor. What do we do if we can't afford one of those individuals?
Well, I always refer clients, if I get a phone call and there is a situation where a client cannot afford my fee or my retainer, I always refer potential clients to the Houston Bar Association. They have a great free hotline. It's called Legal Line, where callers can call for free. They get general information from volunteer lawyers who will guide them and answer general questions regarding what their issue is. Now, Legal Line is a phone call. HBA also offers Houston Lawyer Referral Service Program. Through that program, you can call and HBA, and I say HBA, Houston Bar Association, will refer you to an attorney that is a member of that referral service program, and you can set up a consultation. And I believe, and I don't want to misspeak, but it may be at a discounted rate for a discounted hourly rate for that attorney. Now, their website is www.hba.org, or you can call them at 713-759-1133. The second referral that I have is Lone Star Legal Aid. You can call them and see if you qualify for assistance for free legal services. Their website is www.lonestarlegal.com, and they also have a free phone number, 1-800-733-8394. So I highly suggest that clients that are maybe strapped for financial resources, that they try one of those two organizations and see if they can get the assistance.
Excellent. Thank you very much. In fact, this has been very helpful for all of our listeners, and it's been very helpful to me as well to hear
Yes,
the kinds
sir.
of things that we all should be taking care of.
Yes, sir.
Any last minute tips for our audience?
Well, I mean, I think summarizing what I said earlier, I cannot stress enough the importance of knowing your net worth, right? That is so important for you to know at any given day. If you were to pass away yourself, right, that you know, at least your spouse, you and that person would know, okay, we have this much money, this is what we could liquidate, right? But you should always know your net worth. You should always know where that net worth is, right? You need to know if that's tied up in real estate. You need to know if that's in cash. You need to know if that's a future 401k. So you need to know where your net worth is. You also need to know what your liabilities are, right? You need to know what you owe. But it is very important to have that. It's very important to have access to some type of emergency cash, right? You just never know when you, I mean, it could be a weather disaster, right? And ATMs are all down, or nobody's going to the bank, right? I mean, it could be something as simple as that, where you need emergency cash, right? Access to emergency cash. And it could be something far more serious, where you just need to leave your home environment. You need to leave. You need to take your kids and get to a safe space. So you need to have emergency cash, emergency credit card. You don't have to use that credit card. Just know you have access to that credit in case you need it. So I think those things, in addition to meeting with a skilled, experienced attorney, in the event, right, that you are thinking of divorce or someone has already filed, you do need to meet with an attorney. I highly suggest that. And in the event of sudden death of a spouse, you need to be meeting with a probate lawyer, right? And getting you set up in terms of what your legal hurdles may be, if any. But those are my suggestions for women: finances, divorce, and maybe possible sudden death. So those are my suggestions.
Thank you again for such great information. And I think it's important for us to note that we never know when we might need to leave our home. And
Never
as
know.
you mentioned, well, and in our area with hurricanes,
Right.
and this is something to make sure that we're all prepared, particularly in situations that involve divorce or any other need to leave the house, whether
Right.
it's battery. So we need to know where to go and what to take. So
Exactly.
thank you for sharing this
Thank
information.
you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you for your time. Thank you for joining us. And we hope that you be well as
Thank you
time
so
goes
much.
on.
It was a
Thank
pleasure.
you. And we encourage all of our listeners to follow the Prepare to Care podcast on either iTunes, SoundCloud. You can also catch past episodes of our podcast on our AARP Texas YouTube channel. We ask you to enjoy your day. I want to thank you for listening. And as always, we at AARP want to thank you for caring.